Hello and welcome to what turns out to be the 90th in this Bible study on John's Gospel. Must admit, I never intended it to be that many when we started out, but as I said at the time, it was a wandering through the Gospel, and I think we'll get to 91 before we finish. So I expect to finish this series at the end of this week. Then we'll move on to the next one. I haven't decided what. If you've got any suggestions or yeah, then I'm very happy to take suggestions, and we'll do another walk through a different book or letter. I'm not quite sure yet. Anyway, we're on John's Gospel, John chapter 21, and I just pick up first at the end of chapter 20 when John writes about the purpose of the book. He said Jesus performed many other signs and wonders in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. And that was the purpose of John writing, that we could believe, we had evidence on which we could believe, and then we could receive life. And I think you have to look at the disciples and say that, actually realize that's what Jesus is doing with the disciples. He's basically talking to them, showing them signs, wonders, miracles since his resurrection, so that they can shift from a place of grief and pain and this is all over to a place of hope and realizing that Jesus is alive. And there's many convincing proofs, it says, that Jesus is alive, and that their hearts get triggered and come alive in Christ, and their hope isn't just locked in now to a moment, but there's something so deep and established in them that their hope that they have will sustain them and take them through into eternity, and that the mission that Jesus is giving them to do, that they'll do with confidence and faith because of that working that's going on at this stage in the hearts. Now we hit chapter 21, and I always look and wonder why certain characters are there, and in this case it says afterwards Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened in this way: Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in the Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. And I was just looking at that going, that's an interesting mix. We don't get much mention of Nathanael. He's mentioned early on when Philip goes and finds him under a tree and basically says, I found the Messiah. And Nathanael's like, nah, that can't be right. He comes from the wrong place. But then when he meets Jesus' word of knowledge just convinces him, and he becomes a follower of Jesus. And then we get this mention here. He's among those that, it's almost like when we come to the end of the book, Jesus is just completing something in his heart. This is the man without guile, but he's establishing his faith. Then you've got Peter, who's here. Peter obviously is the one who strongly followed Jesus and then had that crash and burn moment, really, when he lost his way, denied Jesus. But he's here. And you've got Thomas, who was also known as Didymus. Thomas had been the one that had doubted and struggled with the fact that Jesus was alive, and said, I'll only believe if I can put my fingers in the holes in his hands and put my fist in his side, which is what had previously happened, that Jesus said, come on, you can do this. But now you've got them here, and it's like Jesus is gathering this. It's not all the disciples, but disciples, they represent really many aspects to us. He's got them together and ready to appear for them, and it's like Simon Peter, what happens to him? It's almost like I was going to use the word all at sea, but that'd be a really bad pun at this point, wouldn't it? But he's all over the place, and at this moment it's like he needs to do something but doesn't know what to do, and he says to the others, come on, let's go fishing. He returns to what he knows. And I think that's what happens to us sometimes when we're struggling, when things aren't sort of flowing in the way that we want them to flow. It's like we go to something that's familiar, and Simon Peter, he's gone to something that's familiar, and he goes out to fish. The others go with him, and they fish at night. It's that scenario. They can't sleep. They're just all over the place, and they catch nothing. And that cannot have been lost on them. I think, in a place that's teeming with fish, with fishermen that are experienced at fishing, there are not many days when you catch nothing. And one of those days had been a day when Jesus had come and brought that miracle, catch of fish. So I'm sure there was an element where they were talking, going, this hasn't happened. There hasn't been a day like this since, you remember that day when Jesus said, throw your nets out at the other side, and they put their nets out, and the net was overflowing with fish. And you think about that for a moment. You're not going to, in those unusual moments, you're going to remember a previous moment that's similar. And it's in that moment, it says, Jesus stood on the shore, but they didn't realize it was Jesus. It was like he'd appeared again, but he'd come with that sense of a bit of disguise, and he calls out to them, friends. Isn't that beautiful? Friends. That demonstrates the heart of the relationship that Jesus has. He said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. Haven't you got any fish? No, they answer. And then you get this amazing statement, throw your net on the right hand side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. You got that moment of revelation, that moment of realization, that moment where this is now so familiar. And it says Peter, and he heard him say that, he wrapped his garment around him, jumped in the water, and it says the others followed, towing the net full of fish as they were not far from the shore. Now this is the interesting thing. Again, it's like Jesus didn't need their fish, but Jesus wanted their fish. Jesus didn't need that catch, but Jesus was embracing and causing the catch to happen. It says when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals. You remember, it was that dark night of denial around the fire. And I remember in the past I've done a talk called The Tale of Two Fires. This is the second one. The first one being where Peter was, where he denied Jesus. And here, Simon Peter, he gets there, he got the fire with fish on it and some bread. It's like Jesus has brought his offering, his harvest, he's already provided the fish. And yet, they're bringing a load more. And when they arrived, Jesus said, bring me some fish you just caught. In his excitement, Peter races back in and gets some fish. They drag the net ashore, find there's 153 fish. And like, why there's 153? I don't know, but it's like they were large fish. They counted them. This was an amazing haul of fish. But the net wasn't torn. There's a prophetic sign going on there. It's like, so as Jesus saying, what's coming is huge, but the net will not be broken. And it says the disciples, none of them dared ask Jesus who he was. He gave them bread. He took the bread and gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. It was the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he'd been raised from the dead. What's Jesus doing? He's bringing something to their hearts, so that deep inside these disciples, they'd be established in Christ, that the convincing proofs would ground them out ready for the adventure that's to come later on in Acts. So bless you. We'll finish there, and we're going to do one more from the book of John, and that will be the well-known last bit of the restoration of Peter. Bless you. Have a great day.